Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. The investment in infrastructure is absolutely necessary for our economy, and it'll be the biggest investment in the American economy since World War II. These are not my words. These are the words of the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. In some very interesting comments today and in a very interesting Q&A session in the White House briefing room, Pete Buttigieg, who essentially has been the spokesperson, I guess you could call him Mr. Pitchman Pete. He has been a pitchman for President Biden and the Biden administration, the entire White House, in pushing the infrastructure plan, in essentially redefining the traditional definition of infrastructure. Let's take a look at some comments from the Secretary and see what he had to say. In this first segment, he essentially redefines the meaning of infrastructure and establishes the foundation for infrastructure as being central to the American dream. In fact, he says building bold infrastructure has always been central to the American story. And this is a very interesting segment as the Transportation Secretary lays the foundation for gathering public support for the infrastructure plan. He's a good spokesperson, but some of the points he makes are extremely interesting. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let's roll the tape and check out this first segment with the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. Let's check it out.
And the American people are making clear to all of us, regardless of party, that they want us to get it done. And they are not asking us to tinker around the edges. We've risen to this challenge before as a country. In fact, building bold infrastructure has always been central to America's story. We built the Erie Canal, we connected east to west through the Transcontinental Railroad, and we developed the interstate highway system. And each of those projects was audacious, was transformative, and partly because it challenged the American people to expand our concept of infrastructure. But in doing so, these projects transformed our nation for the better, and they fueled the U.S. economy and way of life for the long run. So now it's our turn. The American Jobs Plan will again transform America's roads and bridges, rail and transit, ports and airports for the better. It's going to help modernize our transportation infrastructure so we can compete in the 21st century and connect communities. It will create millions of good jobs in communities across the country. I want to point out again that this is the biggest investment in American jobs since World War II. But I think it's important to demystify the kinds of jobs that this plan is going to create. These are good jobs. They are not mysterious or overly futuristic or inaccessible. We are going to need workers who are good with steel to make the cars and trucks of the future. We're talking about building retrofits that are going to require union carpenters and insulators, painters and glaziers. We're going to need electrical workers more than ever. We're not going to be able to build the roads we need to build without construction workers, laborers, operating engineers. Plumbers and pipe fitters are going to be a huge part of the story of how we overhaul those lead service lines. So this is a jobs plan that is building America's economy from the middle class out, coming at just the right time. It's meeting the challenges that we face today, and it is fully paid for by making corporations pay their fair share.
In the next segment, the Transportation Secretary highlights that infrastructure is the foundation for a safer, more prosperous America, and he talks about the importance of investing in railroads. After all, he's a Transportation Secretary. Let's take a look at this essential foundation, if you will, the public perception foundation that is being established by the U.S. Transportation Secretary. You have heard me talk about this before. Politics is about timing, opportunity, tribalism, and perception. Let's roll the tape and check out how the Transportation Secretary is establishing the foundation for the importance of the infrastructure plan and what I consider to be the inevitable passage of the infrastructure plan through the process of budget reconciliation with the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, just like we saw the American Rescue Plan pass. Let's take a look at some interesting comments and the interesting framework, the groundwork, if you will, that is being established, the foundation that is being created right in front of us by the Transportation Secretary. Let's roll the tape and check it out.
We think it's unacceptable that there are major profitable corporations in this country paying less in taxes than a teacher or a firefighter, not in terms of a percentage, but in terms of dollars, specifically in many cases paying zero. And there's been a lot of talk at this moment, as you know, about what infrastructure is and isn't. I would argue that infrastructure is the foundation that makes it possible for people to live and work well. And you can't live or work or thrive without things like roads, clean water, electricity, broadband. Yes, that's infrastructure. And investing in a full vision of infrastructure is how we build a safer and more prosperous America, and ultimately, I believe, critical to the American dream. So that's why I'm thrilled to be in this role, delighted by the American Jobs Plan announcement, and spending time every day speaking to stakeholders about how to make sure we get it through.
All right, who's going to pick us up? Okay, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. President Biden says he wants $80 billion for rail, and the other day he was talking about having trains that can go across the country as fast as a plane. I'm curious, as the transportation secretary, do you see a big demand for that, for a high-speed cross-country train?
Well, there's definitely a lot of excitement around America about ensuring that the American people can enjoy a high standard of passenger rail service. Like the president, I don't think Americans should settle for less than citizens in other countries enjoy as a matter of course. Now, the truth is we have a backlog to deal with, in addition to making sure that we can create new routes and new capacity. And what's great about the scale of the American Jobs Plan is it's going to support both of those things: maintenance that we've needed to do all along, and a chance to build new routes and expand what Americans can access.
And about how long away are we from something like a high-speed cross-country train?
Well, again, we need to add a lot, first of all, to what we've already got. But we can build new routes with the resources that are here. It's not the end of the story, but it's a fantastic beginning for a new chapter in American rail.
Now, the big question with the entire infrastructure plan is, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for this? Is it going to be raining money? Well, I don't think it rains money, so therefore we have to find a way to be able to raise money somewhere. And the Transportation Secretary says finding the right way to pay for infrastructure does involve raising the corporate tax rates up to 28%. He does essentially leave things wide open and say, hey, we have to talk about this. We are open to ideas and so on and so forth. But again, in very interesting comments, and folks, it's not very common. I want our viewers to know it's not very common for the Transportation Secretary to set up the case or to establish the case for an infrastructure package worth $2.2 trillion in the White House briefing room. Usually it's the White House senior economic advisor, and usually it's other economic advisors. But in this case, it's very clearly from the Biden administration, it's very clearly an all hands on deck approach. We have the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. We have the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. We have the Director of the White House Economic Council, Brian Deese. And we have many individuals across the administration, including the White House Press Secretary, Jen Psaki, essentially pushing the infrastructure plan. Let's check out this segment where the Transportation Secretary talks about the right way to pay for this infrastructure plan. Let's roll the tape and hear from Pete Buttigieg.
Thanks for doing this. As you know, there's been some criticism about the corporate tax hike. Some people have said that user fees should fund infrastructure. And I was curious because user fees often cover the cost of maintenance and repairs. Does this administration have a plan to cover maintenance and repairs for all the infrastructure that's being built?
So, as you know, the jobs plan envisions this being covered through corporate taxes, and the president believes very strongly that this is not something that should burden ordinary American families at a time when we've got so many corporations that have paid literally zero. And I also would argue that there's ample evidence that American corporations can be competitive at a tax rate like 28 for the simple reason that they were extremely competitive at a tax rate like 35. If they could handle 35, surely they can handle 28, which was lower, of course, is lower, would be lower than it's been for most of my lifetime. Now, we've heard a lot of different ideas on what the pay for should be. I think this is a good time to take those inputs on board, but for my dime, it's pretty hard to beat the vision that the president put forward.
Does there need to be a dedicated revenue stream?
Well, look, we'll keep talking with Congress about this, but as you know, for some time, we've seen general fund dollars going into supporting maintenance. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, but the best way I've seen, especially for these kind of capital improvements, is exactly what's in the president's plan.
In the final segment, Pete Buttigieg was specifically asked, is the federal government going to decide, or is the state government going to decide how the billions of dollars for infrastructure are going to be allocated in specific states? For example, if a certain road or if a certain highway or a certain bridge has to be rebuilt, is it going to be the federal government that decides, or is it going to be the state that decides, meaning the local governors and local mayors and local officials? In a very interesting response, Pete Buttigieg says, our role is laying out the broad policy strokes. We want ample resources to go around. Basically, he's saying, hey, Let's just shower money, let's make it rain money, and let's provide a broad framework and let the states decide. That was my interpretation. Again, a very political response, but worth noting, because at the end of the day, this infrastructure plan affects the country, the economy, as well as our money. Remember, for me and for the entire team at Ignition Time, it's not about the red or the blue, it's about the red, white, and blue. I'm not Democrat, I'm not Republican, I'm American. We are all Americans first. Let's roll the tape and check out this interesting response from Pete Buttigieg about who will decide how the money is spent in specific states. Let's roll the tape and check it out.
Mike?
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Having covered state and local government for almost 20 years before coming here, I've seen the divisions that can erupt within a state, between regions of a state, as they fight over limited pots of money to build these kinds of infrastructure projects. How involved do you think the federal government, the Department of Transportation, the Congress, the White House should be in making the inevitable choices that are going to have to be made in terms of which bridge gets fixed first, which road gets widened? There's obviously not enough money to fix everything and to do everything. And so how much of a role do you envision playing, or is it up to the states to kind of wage the wars they normally wage over this stuff?
Well, I think there's always been a push-pull here, right? Because communities often know what is most needed for them. And we welcome that, and I think our program design recognizes that. So I view our role as laying out the broad policy strokes. Even in the existing discretionary grant programs, you've seen this. So for example, with infra, formerly known as FAST grants, we made sure that first wave of calls for applications clarified that we're looking for great projects that also bear on things like equity and climate that are important to this administration. And you'll continue to see that in the program design. Of course, there's always going to be competition for limited funds, but the other thing I would say is that competition is most ferocious when the funds are most limited. And so part of what we're trying to do here is make sure there's an ample set of resources to go around, so that some communities may be the most successful in rounds of competition, but that it doesn't feel like other communities are being left behind, because we've got to make sure there's enough to raise the bar in the country as a whole.
And just one quick follow-up on that. To the extent that then a lot of that decision-making gets pushed to the local level, because that's where they know that how to allocate the needs, how does the federal government retain oversight over what is an enormous amount of money, both in terms of just sort of waste, fraud, and abuse, but also in terms of making sure that that it adheres to those kind of broader equity issues that you guys have talked so much about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big responsibility for a department like mine that'll be charged with carrying this out. And the president has already made clear his very high expectations for us in the rescue plan dollars, right? That's about $40 billion just out of the rescue plan that we got to manage well. But, he also rightly takes pride in the remarkably low rate of waste, fraud, and abuse in the Recovery Act that he led in the Obama administration. I think now's the moment to make sure we double down on those principles to make sure that the dollars are well spent. And yes, we got to make sure that they actually meet the public policy goals that are motivating us to do this in the first place.
So that was it, everyone. Let me know what you thought of these interesting comments from Pitchman Pete, as Pete Buttigieg, the U.S. Transportation Secretary, tries to push the infrastructure plan. Do you agree or disagree with Pete Buttigieg as he tries to push the infrastructure plan laid out by President Biden? Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please click the like button, please subscribe, please enable notifications. I would really appreciate that. That does help out the YouTube algorithm. I want you to know that I appreciate you. We work hard on this channel every single day. Thank you so much once again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.